welcome to the Meeting Mastery podcast, where we have top sales leaders come on, talk about their journeys, not just the up and to the right LinkedIn profiles that you're like, they have a horseshoe somewhere, but actually the nitty gritty, the hard stories, the things that help them climb the ladder. We have Jenna on from Vidyard, who went from a BDR to managing 4 teams over at Vidyard in just 3.5 years. Super excited to be chatting with you today, Jenna. Why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hello, everybody. Super nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Rye.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are actually chatting with Josh on an episode before this.
Nice.
And I know we're all close friends from our time as BDRs together, but he mentioned a little trick out of your playbook as you're on your climb up to an AE, where you actually offered to close a deal before getting a role as a way to put yourself ahead. Do you mind talking a little bit around some of the challenges that you're having getting that role and why you resorted to doing that, and then how you even thought of that in the first place?
For sure. Yeah. Hi, Josh. Hopefully he's listening to this episode too. But yeah, honestly, I had been a BDR for a year. And I think in most cases, everyone who is a BDR, that's for the most part where they're hoping to go. So it's really competitive. And at the time at Vidyard, I want to say, you might remember it was a team of 15 or something like that. Like, it was super competitive. And I think you had already moved on and were on the account executive team. And for me, it was like Vidyard has all of this structure built out of how you can move yourself into the next role. But really, it's about what can I do differently? What can I do that not everyone else is doing, so that when it comes time to applying, I'm a shoe-in and there's something I can say that I've been doing different than everyone else. I honestly don't even know. I'm sure the idea just came to me randomly, or maybe even like my mom suggested it at one point, like, why don't you just ask?
Mom's always helpful.
Exactly. And so I remember sitting in a booth on a different floor than I normally worked at Vidyard, and typed a message out to the manager of the team at the time, Evan, to basically say, hey, I know this is a random idea, but would you be open to it? And I remember he replied back and said, come talk to me. And I was like, oh, geez, this was a bad idea. And I went upstairs and I chatted. He's like, I can't believe you didn't come ask me in person. Like, I was really nervous at the time, but he said, I'm all for it. And from his perspective, it's just helping him get closer to his target, which I really should have thought of from the beginning. And from my perspective now, if somebody wanted to help me hit my target, there's very little I would say. Yeah. From there, I just started doing extra prospecting. It was definitely extra hours, extra work. I remember closing my first single seat. I remember exactly who the customer is. She ghosted me for a little while and then ended up coming back and got her across the line. And from there, I just kept going. And then that was, again, where the role opened up. And I felt pretty confident at that time because I knew I was the only rep who had been taking that on. And sorry, Josh, I think I beat him that time around, but then next time.
Hey, Josh even said every single role he got, it was a no for the first time. So you were the reason for one of those no's. That's
nice. I'm happy to be part of the story.
I'm curious though, because I think it makes a ton of sense on the hiring manager's part to help them hit their number. But if I was in the BDR manager's shoes, like, now Jenna's taking away from the time that she was spending on helping me hit my target. How did you navigate that conversation specifically? Were there any concerns, or like what was their thought process around it?
Yeah, I don't even remember asking my manager at the time if he would be okay with it. I'm sure we did have some type of conversation, but really my thought was like, I won't let my BDR responsibilities, which is ultimately how I'm paid at the time anyways, fall to the wayside. It did mean a lot of extra hours outside of work, or outside of regular working hours, I should say. But yeah, really for me, it was just like, I'm committed to the BDR role. Obviously, I don't want my performance to start to drop on that side, because then that will impact.
You're not going to get hired in that instance either. Right? Exactly. I think sometimes it's ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
That's right. So knowing me, I probably went to Benny and was like, hey, Benny, so I asked for this thing and hopefully you're okay with it. But he was always really supportive too, and knew that was the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's awesome. What are some other, like, of the most challenging moments of your career that, again, aren't seen on the crazy LinkedIn profile that you've accumulated over the years?
I would say the toughest part for me was when I first transitioned into a sales role as a BDR. That was probably the toughest leap that I had to take. That was more so the thought behind the fact that I was leaving a stable salaried role and I was moving into a commissioned role where I did have a house with a mortgage that I wouldn't be able to pay living off of my base. So I think honestly, the biggest challenge for me was the mental, can I actually do this? Am I capable of doing this? That I had to go through. Um, and luckily for me, like I was a pretty successful business development rep. So I didn't have too many struggles when it came to the quota attainment, but it was always the like, what if? And I would say that moment continued. Same with account executive, like that base wasn't enough to cover all of my living expenses. So it was really about the pressure of making sure that I was closing deals. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. I like to think that other people can put pressure on me, but I think honestly, a lot of it comes down to myself. So, probably my toughest moments throughout all of these roles was about the pressure, whether or not it really existed. It was definitely, at least from my perspective, I had made
And
it.
what made you take, I don't even know this, like what made you take that like initial leap, like going from such a stable career so far to something that is a little bit have probably higher upside, but also more downside? Like what initially sparked that out of curiosity?
Yeah, part of it was that I was bored, to be honest. I wasn't feeling like I was always challenged. I think the other piece, though, was I was in somewhat of a, I would say, equivalent sales enablement in insurance type of role. And so seeing what was going on the other side and all of the recognition that all of the sellers were getting, I was like, that's cool. I think I could do that too. So that was my initial. But the one thing is, even before like joining you today, I was thinking about all of the roles that I took on. And there's one common theme for me, which is referrals. So every single role that I took was because I was referred by someone. So I did have a friend who worked at Vidyard at the time, who was my referrer for the role. And that's how I landed at Vidyard. And then when I left and went to D2L, that was as a result of a referral. And then coming back to Vidyard, keeping in touch with my network, my old manager reaching out. So it's always been referrals for me. Help encourage me to at least consider my options.
And were those inbound referrals or outbound referrals? And like maybe how, if someone's trying to like repeat your steps and take the Jenna playbook and implement it in their own career, like what are some of the reasons why you feel like those referrals were such successful referrals? Like how did you cultivate those relationships?
Yeah, the first one was someone that I went to high school with. I wasn't like really great friends with her or anything. So that one just was a LinkedIn, like, hey, hope you're doing well. I would say it was more of an outbound referral from my perspective. When I moved over to D2, though, I think a lot of that is just keeping in touch with your network. Like you never know who you're going to need in the future for something that you're trying to do. It goes along with like never burning a bridge as well. Like I'm a perfect example of someone who left an organization and came back. And had I left on a really sour note or not given it my final month, I'm not sure that would have been possible.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Even from my side, how I landed my first head of sales job, the first 2 months I was at Vidyard as a BDR, the CEO of HyperComply, before worked in growth at Vidyard, was making fried chicken on the rooftop of Vidyard for the company. Something that you know.
Oh, I was there.
Yeah, you were there. And that's how I met And he obviously heard about some of my reputation from me working up the ranks.
Yeah.
And then I reached out from more of like a consulting capacity, nurtured that relationship. And then it got to a point in my career where I was like, I'm ready to take the next step. And his business was looking to bring on someone at that level as well. And if I didn't cultivate that relationship over the 2 years that I spent doing some more consulting and just helping out pro bono, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I think it's so important, like everybody that you come in contact really need to ensure you're putting your foot forward. So just how can I help this person? And leave money on the table. Don't do it for money. Like just do it to collect goodwill chips. That's pretty much
For
the big
sure.
thing.
Oh, yeah. I even scroll through my LinkedIn every day and I see all these new job changes of people who I once worked with. And I'm always like, congrats, so exciting. You just never know. Maybe one day I'll want to move to that organization or they'll move somewhere else or they'll have a role. You really don't ever know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly.
All started with fried chicken for you. I love it.
Oh yeah, it all started with fried chicken. Where can you go wrong?
Nice.
Um, Another thing that we like to do on the Meeting Mastery podcast is hear from top sales leaders around a tip that they have for sales reps and also sales leaders to have their sales reps execute on calls more effectively. You're now managing, I think, like 3 different AE teams as more of a director level person. What specifically are you seeing really make some of the AEs in your organization stand out from the rest?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, my one suggestion or tip is to make sure that reps are always asking the tough questions. I see so many calls where it felt like it was dangling right there to ask a question that would be potentially a negative answer. And so reps stay away from it because they're afraid of what the prospect might tell them that they don't want to hear. But the reality is that if you don't uncover that now, you're probably going to uncover it later and it could really impact your deal. Or maybe it's actually nothing to worry about. Just ask it, get it out of the way. I also think reps are just nervous from the perspective of authority almost, like they don't want to upset the person by asking a question that might challenge them. But I always, again, put myself in the position now as being a sales leader. I would never be offended if somebody asked me a tough question. I'd be like, wow, that's impressive that you had the guts to ask.
Yeah.
And so I always tell the reps that too. Would you be offended if somebody asked you that? Probably not. So let's just ask it.
Love that. It builds trust, right? It builds trust. It shows that you're actually trying to advise and get them to a decision, whether that's yes or no. One thing that I always like to say is if you don't ask the hard questions, the objection is going to still be there, right? Like it's not going to magically disappear or not show up. You're just not going to hear about it. And then that's going to go into your big bucket of dead non-responsive. And dead non-responsive, the bigger that bucket is, I would say the worse you are as a seller, right? So if you're looking to improve your abilities as like an account executive, especially during this climate, when there's a lot of hard questions that need to be asked, measure yourself by your dead non-responsive bucket. That's going to tell you a lot around what you should actually be focusing on. Because if you're losing all your deals to competitors, that's actionable. Let me brush up on competitors and understand a little bit more around how we differentiate. Dead non-responsive just means you don't know why deals are dying. So I think it's an incredible point. What are some examples or even one example of like a question a sales rep could ask to those more hard opportunities?
Yeah, like I think two that come to mind would be like what reasons may exist that you foresee not moving forward, just to get off of that, like why not? Why would you maybe say no to me? And I think also really getting candid when it comes down to the pricing conversations. You can tell a lot by dropping that number and getting the response back of whether the person's like, oh, great, or oh, thanks. And just asking those questions of sounds like maybe that's not what you were expecting, seeing what type of response you get there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the objection from a lot of sales reps listening would be like, but then they're going to say we're too expensive. And again, they're thinking that regardless, confront that. And if you don't do an amazing job answering that objection in real time, well, at least you can go back to your sales leader after and help work through some different ways that you might be able to overcome that. And now you're collecting those data points, right? Maybe there needs to be a product change. Maybe there needs to be a pricing change. You wouldn't know if you didn't ask that question. So yeah, I think that's an incredible tip. Jenna, really appreciate the time that you've spent with me today on the Meeting Mastery podcast. Tune in for the next episode. Again, thanks so much, Jenna.
Thanks, Ryan. See ya.